My parents ignored my birthday for 5 straight years, but bought my sister a brand new Audi. I cut them off, and their desperation turned to stalking. For my 31st birthday, I ordered sushi, opened a bottle of wine, and tried to accept the silence from my family, though the emptiness felt like a weight pressing against my chest. 5 years of forgotten birthdays, half-hearted calls, and empty promises had eroded any hope I had that they would ever treat me with the same care they lavishly gave Genevieve. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Maya, my best friend, sending a screenshot that made my stomach twist. There was Genevieve, smiling wide, standing next to a brand new Audi Q5. The caption read, "An early birthday gift from the best parents ever. #blessed." Her birthday was in January. This was March 16th. They had forgotten me yet again, and there it was in bold proof that I wasn't valued, wasn't seen, wasn't worthy of the same attention. Something inside me broke in a way that no anger could repair. I realized this wasn't occasional forgetfulness or absent-mindedness. It was intentional, a pattern of favoritism disguised as love. I decided then that I could no longer participate in a family that treated me like an afterthought. I quietly, deliberately erased them from my life. I blocked my parents and Genevieve on every platform, shut down every channel of communication, and cut off mutual friends who might try to act as intermediaries. No confrontation, no dramatic showdown, just silence. And for the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of freedom. But peace, I quickly learned, made them desperate. Within weeks, my friend Maya began receiving frantic messages from Genevieve and even my mother, pleading to know if I was okay. They spun stories of mental health crises and manipulative relationships, trying to draw me back in. Letters appeared at my door, full of apologies that weren't apologies, of gifts and sentimental items meant to guilt me. Every gesture was a calculation, every word a trap, attempting to manipulate me into resuming the role I had abandoned. I ignored them, and they escalated. Strange people tried to contact my friends. I learned they even hired a private investigator to confirm I was alive. They wanted to see the result of their negligence undone, but there was nothing to fix, nothing to control. Their attempts only proved what I already knew. I wasn't the problem. The truth was simple. I had stepped away, and my absence left a void they could not bear to confront. Months turned into a year, and slowly, the world they built on my invisibility began to crumble without me as the silent scapegoat. Genevieve struggled to maintain her facade. My parents' obsession with control and image seemed to erode their well-being. And I was living fully, richly, and quietly. My birthday came and went unmarked by their neglect, but for the first time, it felt truly mine. I had taken the only revenge that mattered, a life free from manipulation, full of peace, and entirely my own. The Audi wasn't the first time I felt invisible. Alone in my quiet Chicago apartment, memories crept in like sharp paper cuts, each one reminding me of the subtle ways I had been overlooked. Christmases blurred together, punctuated by glaring inequalities. Genevieve unwrapping a diamond necklace while I received a generic scented candle, her joy amplified by the praise of our parents, my disappointment dismissed with a polite smile. Birthdays, holidays, even simple milestones became lessons in invisibility. I remembered the night of my car accident vividly. My heart raced, my hands shook, but when I called home, my mother's voice carried only a detached acknowledgement. "You're so independent, you'll handle it." Meanwhile, a minor fender bender involving Genevieve had summoned both parents rushing to her side with panic and fuss, as if their presence alone could erase her troubles. That night crystallized a pattern I had felt for years. My suffering barely registered, while every discomfort of my sister's life became an urgent family event. It wasn't always grand gestures or dramatic neglect. Often, it was the subtle, slicing moments that stung the most. My successes minimized, my emotions questioned, my presence taken for granted. They painted me as the strong one, the child who could endure and thrive on her own. That label, outwardly complimentary, was really a convenient excuse for their absence. Every time I sought warmth or recognition, I was met with reminders that I was capable, resilient, independent, as if those qualities justified being ignored. Sitting there, I realized how these countless small wounds accumulated over time, forming a narrative I could no longer ignore. They had never treated me as a person with needs, feelings, or deserving of attention. They only saw me as someone to mold into a role, the invisible backbone supporting the visible happiness of others. Even my achievements, though real and hard-earned, were quietly overshadowed by comparisons, framed against Genevieve's experiences, as if my life existed merely in her shadow. The apartment felt colder that evening, the silence around me echoing years of unacknowledged moments. I saw it clearly. Their favoritism was systemic, a lifelong pattern carefully masked as love and encouragement. Each memory, each overlooked moment, was a reminder that my place in their hearts was conditional, never guaranteed, and always secondary. Understanding that didn't heal the sting, but it gave me clarity. I knew I had to step away, not as an act of rebellion, but as a declaration of self-worth. The cumulative weight of these paper-cut memories demanded recognition. Not from them, but from me, and in that realization, I began to reclaim the life that had quietly slipped from my grasp for so long. I didn't lash out or demand explanations. There were no confrontations, no messages dripping with anger or resentment. I methodically disappeared, quietly severing the invisible cords that had bound me to a family that consistently devalued me. Every phone number, every email address, every social media connection gone. I unfollowed, unfriended, and blocked anyone who might relay information back to them, shutting down even indirect channels of intrusion. It wasn't dramatic or vengeful, it was surgical. I removed myself entirely from the world that had refused to recognize me, erasing any trace of my presence from spaces they considered theirs to control. The act of vanishing wasn't fueled by spite. It was a deliberate reclaiming of autonomy. Every click to block or unfriend felt like lifting a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying, a liberation that was silent but profoundly decisive. I didn't justify my absence with explanations or warnings. I didn't draft long letters or make public announcements. I simply withdrew, leaving no breadcrumbs, no avenues for guilt or manipulation to follow. For years, they had intruded into my life under the guise of love and concern, expecting compliance, attention, and acknowledgement on their terms. By stepping away completely, I shifted the balance of power back to myself. Even mutual acquaintances became part of the perimeter I secured. Any friend, colleague, or distant relative who might inadvertently relay messages, updates, or sentiments was blocked or removed. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about insulating myself from the ripple effects of their entitlement and obsession. The invisible threads that connected me to their dramas were severed with precision, leaving only silence. The quiet of my apartment deepened as I implemented these boundaries. Without their presence, constant expectations, or passive-aggressive judgments, a strange clarity emerged. For the first time, I could exist without negotiating my worth, without performing gratitude for neglect, without bending myself to fit a role they had chosen for me. The peace I had been denied for decades began to seep in, subtle but transformative, affirming that absence can be a powerful form of resistance. It wasn't about revenge, though it carried the quiet authority of one. It wasn't about proving a point or eliciting guilt. It was about survival, about reclaiming space in a life that had long been crowded by indifference and favoritism. And in that deliberate erasure, I discovered a freedom so profound it felt almost sacred. A life no longer mediated by their whims, no longer weighed down by their conditional love, finally mine to inhabit fully. Roughly 2 weeks into the quiet, the first cracks appeared in my self-imposed isolation. My colleague, with a hint of unease, mentioned a woman named Cynthia calling repeatedly at the office, claiming an urgent family situation. I didn't return the calls, but the ripples started to reach others. Shortly after, Maya began receiving a flurry of texts from Genevieve, each one dripping with staged anxiety. "Ilara isn't responding. We're so concerned. Mom is worried sick." The messages were carefully crafted performances, full of worry and melodrama, as if my absence was a tragedy rather than a boundary I had set. Their words painted a tableau of a caring, anxious family desperate to reconnect. But behind the script, their role in driving me away was invisible, conveniently erased. They positioned themselves as victims of a problem they had created, spinning concern into a weapon meant to pull me back. Each message was a calculated attempt to manipulate perception. They weren't seeking genuine reconciliation or attempting to repair past neglect. They were testing the limits of my silence, trying to gauge how much pressure it would take to breach my carefully erected walls. The urgency in their tone, the over-the-top worry. It was theatrical, an attempt to frame themselves as loving caretakers rather than the architects of my alienation. Even as I read the texts, a part of me felt the absurdity of the performance. They had spent years overlooking, minimizing, and dismissing my experiences, yet now they expected empathy and immediate response. The stark contrast between their past behavior and current frantic concern was jarring, almost surreal. I realized that their panic wasn't rooted in love or genuine worry. It was born from confusion and frustration at losing control over me. Their reaction, while unsettling, only reinforced my resolve. I refused to validate their narrative or engage in a drama that had nothing to do with my well-being. Each text, each call, each feigned crisis reminded me why I had withdrawn. Their version of love had always been performative, self-serving, and conditional. As the days passed, the wave of panic grew, touching friends, co-workers, and even casual acquaintances, all inadvertently caught in their attempts to locate me. I observed from the sidelines, detached, witnessing their desperation unfold like a play in which I no longer participated. The irony was almost poetic. The family who had ignored me for years now presented themselves as desperate caretakers, yet it was precisely my absence that revealed the hollowness of their concern. Through it all, I stayed silent. I watched the first wave of their panic crest and recede without breaking my boundaries. Their anxiety, artificial though it was, marked the beginning of a reckoning they hadn't anticipated. By refusing to respond, I claimed control over my presence, proving that withdrawal could be more powerful than confrontation, and that silence, carefully maintained, was itself a form of authority. When their initial attempts to reach me failed, their tactics morphed into something darker. Friends began sharing disturbing updates. My parents and Genevieve were spreading stories, insinuating that I was in some sort of mental health crisis or trapped in a controlling relationship. My deliberate withdrawal, a reasonable assertion of independence, was twisted into evidence of instability, a supposed symptom of personal failure rather than a boundary long overdue. The distortions didn't stop with whispers or casual conversations. They escalated, crossing lines I had thought were inviolable. My landlord received multiple calls, each one cloaked in urgency and concern, seeking information about my whereabouts and well-being. At the gym, staff were approached under the guise of checking up on me, probing for any clue of my routine or habits. Even my dentist's office, a place entirely unrelated to family matters, was contacted in an effort to extract personal details. Every move felt like a calculated intrusion, designed to track, monitor, and subtly pressure me into submission. The pattern was clear. They sought to transform private independence into public justification for interference. By presenting themselves as caretakers and framing me as fragile, they attempted to normalize their invasive behavior. It was manipulation dressed in civility, a way to mask control as concern. Those who were not aware of our history might have believed the narrative entirely, seeing me as erratic or unstable instead of recognizing the truth. I had simply refused to participate in a family dynamic that consistently disregarded my worth. Through friends, I pieced together the scope of their escalation. Calls, inquiries, and rumors rippled through social circles, shaping opinions and creating a climate in which my absence seemed suspicious. It was a smear campaign built on selective storytelling and false concern, designed to isolate me and coerce me back into the life I had deliberately left. Their efforts highlighted a harsh reality. They preferred appearances over accountability, manipulation over honesty. Despite the intrusive nature of these actions, I remained unmoved. Every call unanswered, every question ignored, reinforced my commitment to autonomy. I watched the escalation unfold without responding, recognizing the absurdity and futility of their tactics. My privacy, long neglected, became my shield, and their attempts to control it only illuminated the depth of their desperation. In the face of relentless probing, I felt a quiet affirmation of my own judgment. By resisting the narrative they were trying to construct, I retained clarity and agency. Their campaign, though aggressive, ultimately had no power over me. The invasion of boundaries, the twisted stories, the attempts at social manipulation, none of it could erode the distance I had carefully established. For the first time, I understood the strength in silence and the authority in walking away, proving that autonomy cannot be rewritten by the narratives of those who failed to honor it. The letters began arriving quietly, slipped through my apartment door like whispers of a world I had left behind. Each envelope carried an unmistakable scent of calculated effort. My mother's handwriting sprawled across pages, filled with phrases that sounded like remorse but carried none of the weight. "I'm sorry if you felt hurt," she wrote, as if my feelings were optional, her words carefully crafted to suggest concern while avoiding true responsibility. Alongside the letters, small parcels appeared. Childhood treats I once loved, neatly wrapped, each item a lure meant to awaken nostalgia and guilt. My father, in contrast, chose the sterility of formality. A typed letter, professional in tone, recommended family counseling as a solution, framing any tension as a breakdown in my communication rather than acknowledging their repeated favoritism. The words were precise, devoid of emotion, yet rich with manipulation, an attempt to make me question whether I had overreacted or misunderstood their intentions. Their strategies were different, but the goal was the same: to lure me back under the illusion of reconciliation while avoiding any admission of wrongdoing. I studied the letters and packages carefully, recognizing the patterns I had long learned to identify. The apologies were hollow, a performance designed to extract response or soften boundaries. The gifts, though familiar and comforting at a surface level, were tools of influence, intended to reestablish control by appealing to sentiment rather than truth. Each item and phrase was a reminder that their love, as offered, was conditional and contingent on my participation in the story they preferred to tell. Even as I read their words, a quiet clarity settled over me. I saw the mechanics of their manipulation, the careful balance of guilt, sentiment, and obligation, designed to weaken my resolve. There was no acknowledgement of inequity, no recognition of years spent in neglect, no mention of the invisible hierarchy that had dictated my childhood and adulthood alike. Every gesture was a mask, hiding the refusal to truly face the consequences of their actions. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. Their letters and gifts, meant to provoke reaction, instead became evidence of their desperation and inability to confront reality. The very act of sending them revealed their dependence on my compliance, their need to control the narrative, and their fear of the emptiness I had created by stepping away. Sitting quietly with these tokens of manufactured remorse, I felt an unexpected satisfaction. Their attempts at influence, though elaborate, could not penetrate the boundaries I had carefully built. I realized that accountability is not offered in clever words or wrapped packages. It is earned through acknowledgement and change. In the absence of that truth, I remained steadfast, watching their gestures for what they were: manipulation cloaked in affection, and finding strength in my refusal to be swayed. Through Maya, I learned something that made my skin crawl. Genevieve had organized a public Facebook event titled, "Alara's Birthday Celebration. Wherever you are." The invitation list was long, dozens of people clicking attending, commenting with hearts and well wishes, all under the guise of honoring me. What struck me most wasn't the volume of attention. It was that the celebration was entirely without my presence. They had orchestrated a spectacle that showcased their devotion while carefully erasing my actual agency. My absence became the centerpiece, transforming the very thing they had neglected into a performative display of virtue. The same family that ignored birthdays, milestones, and achievements for years was now projecting an image of unconditional love and concern, all while I remained completely excluded. Reading the event notifications and scrolling through the posts, I felt the calculated absurdity of it. Every comment, every emoji, every tag reinforced a narrative they were desperate to maintain: that they were loving, attentive caregivers. Meanwhile, the truth, the deliberate neglect, favoritism, and emotional harm, was nowhere to be acknowledged. They had transformed reality into theater, using my absence as a prop, my silence as proof of their compassion. The audacity of it was staggering. They weren't simply trying to reach me. They were trying to control how the world perceived me and them, turning a personal boundary into a public performance. Their manipulation extended beyond family and friends into the digital space, where appearances could be curated and applause could be harvested, all without confronting the consequences of their behavior. I couldn't help but notice the irony. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and minimized had culminated in a manufactured celebration in my honor. A celebration I could not attend, a recognition that meant nothing because it was based on fiction. The spectacle wasn't about me. It was about preserving an image they desperately wanted to project, a carefully constructed story where they were the caring, wronged parties and I was the absent child they longed to honor. Rather than feeling hurt or pressured, I felt a renewed sense of detachment. Their attempt to manipulate perception only highlighted their insecurity and the hollowness of their so-called love. I didn't need validation from a performance staged in my name. Their digital fanfare, full of carefully curated concern, only confirmed that stepping away was the right choice. It underscored a truth I had long known. My presence and my life belonged to me, not to the narratives they were desperate to spin, and no online event, no matter how public, could rewrite that reality. It started subtly, almost like static in the background of a life I was rebuilding. Maya mentioned receiving a message from a stranger. Someone with a vague profile, no photo, no history, asking casual yet prying questions about me. Others began noticing similar attempts. Inquiries cloaked in friendliness, but threaded with unease. It didn't take long to recognize the pattern. This wasn't coincidence or curiosity. It was surveillance disguised as concern. The realization that my family had resorted to such tactics sent a chill through me. Their obsession had taken a darker turn, morphing from manipulation into something that hovered on the edge of violation. They couldn't accept being shut out, so they sought alternative ways to reassert control. Every anonymous message, every attempt to gather information, was another reminder that my boundaries weren't being respected. They were being tested. When I learned they had hired a private investigator, the final veil dropped. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard that they wanted proof, that I was safe. The words sounded compassionate on the surface, but the motive was anything but. It wasn't about my safety. It was about their need to validate the story they were telling themselves, that I was lost, misguided, or under someone's influence. They couldn't stand the ambiguity of my silence, so they turned my privacy into an investigation. The irony was sharp. The investigator's report confirmed what they refused to believe. I was fine. More than fine, I was thriving. My career was stable, my social circle intact, my life peaceful. The report, intended to soothe their anxiety, only amplified it. My well-being didn't fit their narrative. They needed a version of me that was broken or unreachable to justify their behavior. But instead, they were confronted with evidence of independence and calm. Their reaction was predictable yet unsettling. Rather than accepting the truth, they doubled down on confusion, spinning theories to explain why I hadn't returned. They couldn't understand that my silence was not the result of harm, but the outcome of healing. To them, peace without their involvement was an affront, something unnatural that had to be decoded. Each new attempt to reach me blurred the line between care and control. Their fixation wasn't rooted in affection. It was fueled by the need to resolve the discomfort of their own guilt. They wanted closure without accountability, reconciliation without change. By investigating my life from a distance, they tried to reclaim access that I had consciously revoked. I stopped reacting entirely. The intrusion only reaffirmed what I already knew. Their pursuit wasn't about connection. It was about ownership. They were desperate to solve a puzzle of their own making, unable to grasp that I had already stepped outside the frame. And in their search for proof that I was alive and well, they accidentally confirmed the one truth that mattered. I was finally free. A year had passed since I withdrew completely, and the quiet I had cultivated allowed me to observe the ripple effects from a safe distance. Through casual mentions from acquaintances and subtle hints in conversations, I began to piece together the aftermath of my absence. Genevieve, who had long thrived on the attention and control that came from being at the center of every family episode, seemed increasingly unmoored. Reports suggested she had abruptly left her job and moved back into the family home, struggling to maintain the composure and dominance she once wielded effortlessly. My parents, too, appeared to be unraveling. Friends whispered that Robert was facing mounting stress in his business ventures, while Cynthia's health seemed fragile, possibly exacerbated by anxiety and constant attempts to reclaim the control they had lost. The carefully constructed family facade, which had relied on my compliance and silent endurance, was now showing cracks. Their equilibrium, long dependent on my willingness to absorb neglect, handle conflict, and maintain the household's emotional stability, no longer held. It was almost poetic justice, though not the kind I had orchestrated with malice. Their struggles were the natural consequence of systems built on imbalance. Without my consistent presence to anchor their illusions and absorb the fallout of favoritism, the foundations of their lives began to tremble. Tasks they once delegated to me, responsibilities they took for granted, and the social narratives they controlled now demanded their own attention and energy. Attention and energy they hadn't cultivated or managed before. Even distant friends and colleagues remarked on the shift. The family, previously confident in its ability to perform civility while hiding inequities, now appeared tense and unsettled in social gatherings. Casual updates conveyed a sense of instability and disorientation, a household accustomed to a predictable hierarchy now struggling to function without its invisible support. Watching this unfold, I felt a quiet sense of resolution rather than triumph. There was no gloating, no deliberate sabotage, just a recognition of the natural consequences of entrenched behaviors. The patterns of favoritism, control, and manipulation, sustained for decades by my compliance, had nowhere to go but collapse when I finally removed myself. Through it all, I remained removed from their crises, observing only the natural unraveling of a structure that had never truly been balanced or healthy. Their discomfort was not my responsibility, and their instability underscored the reality that the family unit had depended on exploitation and oversight, not mutual respect. In stepping away, I had dismantled the invisible scaffolding holding their world together, revealing how fragile it truly was without me as the unseen linchpin. I often pause in my apartment, surrounded by the warmth and comfort I've cultivated over the years, and reflect on how drastically my life has changed. The space is filled with personal touches, familiar scents, and objects that carry meaning only to me, each one a testament to the autonomy I fought to claim. I've surrounded myself with people who respect, cherish, and support me, not because they're obligated to, but because they choose to be present in my life. These friendships, carefully nurtured, form a network of loyalty and love that I can rely on without hesitation. My career, too, has flourished in ways I never anticipated. Freed from the weight of expectation and the constant scrutiny of those who once undermined me, I have pursued opportunities with clarity and confidence. Achievements that might have once been overlooked or diminished are now fully mine to celebrate. Every promotion, every project, every recognition is experienced on my own terms, untainted by the invisible comparisons that once clouded my accomplishments. I realize now that the revenge I sought was never about dramatics or confrontation. It was the act of carving out a space where I could thrive without interference, where my worth was determined solely by my own standards. By removing myself from a family that consistently undervalued me, I reclaimed the most precious resource I had been denied: peace. That peace is not loud or ostentatious. It is quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. In moments of reflection, I see clearly that I was never the problem to be fixed or controlled. I was the one they failed to appreciate, the one whose absence now underscores the emptiness of their assumptions. By choosing myself over their approval, I have become the prize they lost, a life unbound and fully lived. The simplicity of my victory is its power. No schemes, no confrontations, no public displays, just a deliberate commitment to living in a way that aligns with my values and desires. The satisfaction comes not from watching them struggle, but from experiencing the fullness of my own life. Evenings spent laughing with friends, mornings dedicated to projects that excite me, quiet weekends filled with reflection, and a sense of dignity that has never been conditional. Ultimately, I understand that the richest form of retribution is not revenge in the conventional sense, but the steady, unshakable life you build when you refuse to be diminished. My chosen family, my career, my sanctuary, all of it stands as a testament to resilience, self-respect, and the profound freedom that comes from living on one's own terms. In claiming this life, I have proven that the truest victory is a life fully embraced, joyfully lived, and entirely mine. Do you think I handled cutting my family out the right way, or should I have tried to forgive and reconnect? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious about how you would handle something like this. If you enjoy stories about betrayal, revenge, and reclaiming your life, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.